Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 10 times test coverage, less drama, shift left functional and performance testing. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your technical moderator today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening over your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar control panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed there for you. You do have the opportunity to submit your text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please type them into that same question section and I will respond to you one-on-one as soon as possible. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. All right, I would now like to turn things over to Dave Caro. Welcome, Dave. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining the call. Appreciate your taking your time out. We're pretty excited about sort of sharing what we're seeing with people who are making this change and helping those who want to get started to kind of ease their path. Again, my name is Dave Caro. I'm a developer advocate. I'm on the product team here at Blazemeter. And just a little brief bit about my background. I've been involved in performance monitoring and performance testing for over a decade. The earlier part of my career, I actually was focused on what you might call pre-deployment, outside-in, high-scale load testing. And that's people who would come to us and say, wow, I'm going live very soon and I don't know if I'm really ready. Can you please help me shake it out? So that is the sort of most dramatic way to do performance testing or any kind of testing, is at the last minute, lots of drama. And my career has really been about actually a shift left of my own, which is that I've moved more into development-centric testing and then even sort of pre-production, and then furthermore into how do we equip development teams themselves to do their own testing instead of depending on a separate resource to do the testing. So a little bit about my background. I've been at Blazemeter for 2 years, and I came here because they got what it would take to help developers be successful. So we're going to have a couple of poll questions to start, and I just want to do a little bit of setup before we go there to define what I mean by shift left, because we're going to ask you about shift left both in the sort of functional testing environment and the performance testing environment. So shift left means starting testing earlier in the development cycle and writing those early tests in the same small team that's developing the code. So it means earlier, a shift left in the timeline, and also a shift left kind of in the development cycle so that you're actually doing the testing where the developing is being done. And if you think about it, if a test is being, or sort of a team is working together, a small team is working together, and they all know what they're trying to do in a sprint, why they're trying to do it, and how it's supposed to work, there's not much need for transfer of information or documentation or knowledge transfer to a separate testing unit. The people who are on that same team know best what they're building and have the best chances of testing the right stuff. So put another way, shifting left means not waiting for a handoff of those specifications to a separate group and then waiting until developers, and waiting to do that until developers think they're done. In the old world, we would develop, and when we said we were done developing, we'd hand it to QA, and they were a separate team on the other side of a wall. And there was a lag there and also a big gap in communication, right? So shift left, the goal here is to eliminate surprises, because when you find fundamental problems late in the process, it's lots of drama. It's what people are used to at the end of a project, which is sort of this, oh, wow, I better call home and say I'm not coming home for dinner, and by the way, we better cancel our plans for the weekend because we have to ship next week and we got a lot of stuff piling up, so a lot of drama, right? And the DevOps handbook, they sum up a lot of the principles by saying it's being able to deliver business intent quickly without heroics, right? So, and finally, the last point I'll make here, it kind of comes from a few different angles, but shift left reinforces the definition of done, is that when a story has been delivered as something that's properly functioning and performing to expectations. It's not done when you think you've finished writing it or coding it. It's done when you've proven that it does what it's supposed to do. right? Okay, so on that note, let's shift to the poll questions now. And we're going to ask you again first about functional testing in your environment, whether that's shifting left, and then we'll ask about performance testing. Let's bring the polls up. And, you know, we'll give you maybe 10 or 15 seconds to kind of grok this and then vote. All right, wrap it up. So we're gonna, okay, let's see what we got. So over a quarter of you aren't even being asked to shift left yet, which is interesting. That's fine. Third of you are considering it. Only 3% have a hard deadline, and 37% of you have made a decision to make it happen. Okay, that's a good mix. So more than half of you are, and that's probably why you're here, right? More than half of you are looking to do this. Now let's ask a trickier question here. Let's ask that same question about performance testing. Okay, about 10 seconds more here. All right, let's see what you said. Okay, interesting. We have people that have indeed shifted left and are considering. And this is not a shocker. When people think of performance testing, they usually think it's something that's pretty heavyweight and requires a dedicated separate team. And that's kind of what we're about informing about here, is that it doesn't have to be that way, and an even smaller deadline. So thank you so much for jumping in on that. Let's continue on with the presentation now. So when you're trying to both move fast and have test coverage, it seems kind of like it's a very challenging thing to do. You want to move faster, and you actually want to achieve better coverage than we've always been struggling to achieve when we're going slower. How can that possibly be, right? So you might say, well, I just need better tools, or maybe some better training, and maybe even calisthenics first thing in the morning or something. We'll be more efficient, and we'll try to increase our coverage by 20%. And what we're saying here is that there's a very different way to look at this. Rather than just do what you've been doing a little better, there's a different way to do it, right? And that's to shift left. So instead of having this, I code and then I hand off and then somebody else tests, shifting left basically says I'm going to have way more people doing testing, and I'm going to be testing much sooner, so I'm going to have fewer surprises. So literally 10 or 100 times more, looks more impressive as a percentage, of course, 1,000%, more coverage by actually having more people test. And you might say, well, those tests aren't going to be as, they're not going to be as sophisticated or as carefully thought out as the ones which a dedicated tester does. And you would possibly be right. To that, I would say having some feedback early is better than no feedback. And it doesn't preclude you from having somebody who is an expert tester make a pass later in the game if you really want another layer of safety, but they're going to find less stuff because the obvious stuff is going to be found while the code's being built, not when you think it's ready to ship. So here's a shift left vision for you. As code is committed, tests that are specific to that code run automatically, and developers get instant feedback. So the entire team always knows the state of the code, and bugs get fixed before anyone declares done. So I'll put this in a real-world example. A previous company I worked for ran their functional UI tests 3 times a day. And every developer that wanted to add a change or a new feature to the code had to have a matching functional test before they could go to their boss and do a review and be told that, yeah, I agree, you're done. And the spirit behind this was that you may break your code or you may break somebody else's code, but you should know about that before you get back from your morning coffee, or before you get back from lunch, or before you leave for the day. And so they literally ran the tests at those intervals so that people would get near real-time feedback, and then things are fresh in your mind. What is it that I broke? Oh, yeah, I was over here in the code, as opposed to getting something 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks later saying, stop what you're doing, I need you to go look at the stuff you were doing 2 months ago and figure out how you created this bug, right? Hopefully everybody gets the difference there. So And you know, shift left has actually been happening a little bit for a little while. So when I say shift left, I mean all the way to the very beginning, but let's look at kind of historically how testing's been done. Certainly in the performance testing space, it was seen as a pre-deployment, kind of a delivery phase task, right? And then people realized that it'd be powerful if they could somehow do some amount of testing at the build stage. So every time they do a build, at least do a smoke test to make sure that nothing's horribly slow or broken. But then there's a very strong culture in many organizations, never break the build. Because if a build gets broken, then everybody stops what they're doing and works on that. So how could you get even earlier feedback so that they're, again, less drama, right? And that's where you shift all the way left to where code is created. So as you're creating code, you're creating simple tests that prove that it does what it's supposed to do and it does it in a responsive way. Right? And one of the benefits of this is that if you have that, then the testing assets you create follow your code through the whole cycle, so making it easier to test in the build and easier to test pre-deployment, but also easier to test in production. Because if you've already got a set of working tests, you never have this lag. I used to work for Keynote, which is an outside-in monitoring company, and one of the questions we would get is that, hey, I've proved that my code works 3 times during the development process, and then I ship it live, but the tests that are running on this outside-in monitoring network instantly start to fail because we're not able to update them with the tests I was using in development. And there's a lag where all the tests go red, but it's just because they push new code, not because anything's broken, right? And in this world where you've got assets you've built, you push them with the code and there's no hiccup. So that gives you really continuous testing, right? Now, I want to share a story I got from one of my customers who said that this is their world before they decided to shift left. And they would develop a feature release, right? And the feature release, that's a green arrow here, right? They build that feature release, and about partway through that release, they'd start building some tests, and they'd build functional tests, and they'd also start working on regression testing. But that would take them a little while, and so the development team would finish that release and start with the next release, as feature 2, that pink one there. And meanwhile, the testing people are still kind of working on their testing for the first one. And just about the time the team gets finished with building the features for the second sprint, they're just about then getting to building their performance tests that reflect the stuff that was done in the first feature release. And after that, they get into automation development for that first release. So there's always this lag, right? And meanwhile, development is moving forward, but there's always this lag. And so there's this strange, we think we're done, but we're not sure. And then the bugs come in and you have a burn down chart. So this is their life before shifting left. And this is what they didn't like about it, okay? Technical debt was always accumulating. And maybe it's just the nature of being in a technical business, but you know, the very process, the way it was set up, meant that they didn't even know what the technical debt was until after they thought they'd finished something, and then they're busy with the next thing. And so there's this constant struggle, which really is this next bullet too, right? Do we release or do we focus on quality? We've got a release goal. You know, there's a poster that says real artists ship. Do you release and sort of fail forward, don't roll back, fail forward, but there's this tension, should we focus on making it right? And one of our organizations we work with, literally, they had such a cultural battle with this that they decided to reinvent how they did all their testing, because their testing organization had been built as a protective thing to stop bad things from getting to the world. But they were seen as a sort of a barrier that was not working towards a common goal of shipping often to get things to the customers. And so they reinvented the whole thing and basically folded their current QA and reconstituted in development and gave the developers the ability to push all the way to production. And they're still very much in business and doing very well. So this whole tension between do I release or do I focus on quality? And when you have a lag, it's a constant problem. And the other problem that's also constant when you have this lag is the context switch. If you think you've finished code and you went on to something else and then you went on to yet another project, and only then after you've switched what you're doing twice, you're told to go back to the thing you were doing 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago and fix something. It's a huge context switching problem. It's a mental context switching problem. It's even a physical one, which is that the files that you've got handy on your desktop that you know where everything is and you know where things are in various modules, you have to pull that stuff away, go back to the stuff you're working on and do this big context switch. And it causes an inefficient thrashing. And then I need you to get this week's stuff done. Oh, but by the way, I need you to fix the stuff you did 3 weeks ago. And by the way, we got a 90-minute all-team meeting you got to go to in an hour, and people are pulling their hair out and going crazy, right? So Another thing that happens here in this environment is that automation is often an afterthought. And as they admitted, they weren't even doing their automation development until they've gone through a lot of manual testing and a little bit of performance testing, and then they would sort of try to automate their regression, right? So automation is an afterthought, and it's often abandoned. And the reason it's often abandoned is because as these new releases come along, they break the previous tests that were written by people who didn't write the release in the first place. And so the tests are often breaking. So you fight and fight and fight to get yourself to like 7% coverage, and then a bunch of your tests break, and you're back to 5% coverage because you take those flaky tests out, right? So this whole notion of testing be a totally separate thing that's done downstream, it makes getting to high levels of automation super duper hard. And we'll see what you guys say in the polls later about automation achievements, right? So I'm going to take a break and move to a demo in just a second, and then we're going to talk about sort of the after shifting left from the very same customer that shared the story I was just giving you, right? So what if we could create simple text-based files to define very small scoped tests, right? And what if we could store those tests right with the code? So they live with the code, they're a subfolder, they're whatever. When you go to get it out of GitHub or wherever you're storing your code, you get the code and the tests in one pull. You're getting it all in one fetch, right? And then you run that code and the test on every commit. And everyone's environment is different. This may mean you have to put up a target in the cloud or a target on a Docker container and then spin up a test harness and test it and then tear the whole thing down when you're done. Or maybe you have test environments you'd like to keep up. Where we're going in the world is really more of the previous, which is the sort of ephemeral sort of things get brought up, you test, and then you throw them away so that you always have a clean copy of everything, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build an API endpoint test, which really, in a way, is both functional and performance. I'm going to actually hit an API that a web app is dependent on, could be a mobile app too, but I'm going to hit it, and I'm going to do some testing on it, and I'm going to do all this in just a few minutes here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a template. I'm actually going to go to the web app to get a quick sort of jump start on what I need, and then I'll show you how we're going to tweak it. So I'll create a template with the BlazeMeter Chrome extension. I'll add a variable, add an assertion to make sure we're getting well-formed data, and I'll add a performance threshold, right? And then I'll test it right on my desktop. And then when I'm done, I would commit this, I would clone this, and I would basically repeat. I probably wouldn't have to go re-record something with a Chrome extension because I'd already have a template for what I need, and I would just kind of swap out the names of the APIs and tweak my assertions and such, right? So I'm going to switch here and go over to browser window here. Just want to confirm, if someone else on the line want to confirm that you can see the product store on your screen?
It looks good.
All right, awesome. So this is a demo site that we built. Some of you may be familiar with Blaze Demo, which is sort of an air reservation site. This is Demo Blaze, which is more like an e-commerce store and is deliberately a little more complex. It's all based on APIs that are actually running in the background on an API gateway. We'll see in a second how this works. Now I'm going to actually bring up the BlazeMeter Chrome extension, and I'm going to say I want to build a demo Blaze API for Vue. So my goal is to actually capture the Vue API call and the response and know what to do with it, right? So I can start that. I just literally have to go down here and view a product. And I've got what I need, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to stop the recorder. Now I caught more than what I need. Whoops. I caught more than what I need. So let's look at the editor here. And I can see that I did a web get of the page, and then I can see that this HTTP live streaming index file was downloaded, and over here I can see that an HTTP live streaming piece of content was downloaded, and yet another one, right? And so those are things, there's some prefetching going on and such. I don't really need those, so I'm going to actually just say, you know what? Oops, I'm going to say I want to remove this guy, and I know I don't need this guy either. This is just a sort of a warm-up call, and I'm going to delete this guy here, and finally I'm going to delete this guy here. And I forgot to delete that one up there. So now we'll be left with with one API call, all right? And we can see that it gathered a whole bunch of headers. I'm going to clean those up after we export. Now I'm just going to export to something called a TORS YAML file. A YAML file, obviously human readable, right? So I'm going to tell the recorder to export that into YAML, and I'm bring it up in my text editor. And we can see that it gave the scenario the name that I gave it when I recorded. And it has some stuff defaults for concurrency and the ramp and the hold time. And then in here, there was a bunch of header stuff captured. And I know that I don't actually need most of these. I do need the JSON. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of these other lines here, right? And then I've got the URL that I hit, and I've got a label. Label is the human readable part, right? So I could actually just say, you know what, this is the Vue API call, right? And so then in reports, I would see that, right? And we can see that it hard-coded that that it was product ID number 7. So I've really quickly just made a little bit of cleanup in here, but I'm going to do kind of the cooking show maneuver here, and I'm going to jump you over to the version where I have made some additional changes. And what I've done in here is I have made the base URL a variable so that when I can use this same script in different environments. I can use it on my desktop, I can use it in a staging environment, I can use it in a pre-production environment, I can use it in production because I've made the base URL variable. I also made the product ID a variable. I could feed this with a CSV list if I wanted to, but for now I'm happy to have it just testing one thing. I'm just trying to do a really quick smoke test. And I've changed the time for the whole thing to run at about 1.5 minutes. And down here at the end, I've added an assertion where I'm saying I need to make sure that it contains this stuff. And what these are is in the response, there's an image, there's an ID, there's price, and these are kind of the first 3 things that spit out in the API call. And I want to make sure that the API call is well formed, so I'm testing for these goodies, right? And I'm going to look for that in the body of the response, and I'm using regex, so I say true. And then the last thing I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, I want to use a pass-fail criteria. And if the average response time is greater than 500 milliseconds for 20 seconds, stop this as failed. And I could make that a much shorter window if I want to be really more restrictive. But when you're first hitting this, maybe there's a little bit of slowness just because you're spinning things up or whatever, right? So now I have, in less than 30 lines, I've got a screen full of stuff that is a test that matches up very nicely with this Vue API that I've built. And I can run this anytime that that code gets touched, or any code that I think this code is dependent on gets touched, right? So let me pop over to a terminal window here, and you can see I'm gonna run this. BZT is the command line for BlazeMeter Taurus. There's the name of the file. I put that's got the YAML, and then I'm overwriting the scenarios to actually change it from ID 7 to ID 6. Right, so I'm showing you how right here in the command line I could actually change any of those variables that are inside there, right? Let's run it. And what's going to happen here is that Taurus, which is an open source tool, you can grab that at gettaurus.org, I'll show that to you in a sec, is going to go, it's going to take that YAML file, it's going to digest it, and that's actually going to create for me in the background a JMeter test that I never had to see or edit or create, and it's running that now right on my desktop, and I can see that this Vue prod, I've hit it 7 times, I've got no failures, my average time is well under that 500 milliseconds threshold, and I've got some statistical stats if you want to kind of look at, well, how are they distributed, and just to be sure, I've got some information about my test harness here. Do I know that I make sure that my CPU isn't pegged or anything so that I'm not getting false data because of that, right? So we have a lot more information about how to learn Taurus, how to use Taurus, how to apply it. I just wanted to show it here as an example of the way creating a smaller scope test that does something useful doesn't have to be, again, a lot of drama, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, right? I don't know if anybody was timing me. I hope I got that done in roughly 3 minutes, but anyway, so here we are. So let's talk about where that leads you to. And this is, again, going back to a real live example. I wish I could tell you the company. I can just tell you that they're a major entertainment company, but I can't be more specific than that. This is what they accomplished, which was that they created kind of a new way of doing things where each feature release had all of the test creation and execution done in the same sprint as the feature releases, right? And so the testing didn't lag anymore. It actually was in line with the feature releases. And at any time, those yellow arrows going down, any time they could create a shippable release. They tended to cluster these and do them, they would do an actual production release maybe every 2 or 3 sprints, but they're always ready. And this is kind of like the idea of continuous integration, always have a working build. Well, this takes it a little further. Always have a functioning product that meets the expectations, right? So this is what they saw when they made this shift, which was they stopped growing a technical debt. They were able to embed quality in every step of the SDLC. And this is an organization that didn't sort of, quote unquote, make the developers do the testing. They actually embedded their testing experts in the Agile teams, right? And so they talked about how it was important for them to be on the same page, and the only way to do that really was to have them co-located and living in the same world, right? And the beauty was that the developers got feedback immediately. As they're building their code, as they're doing things, they're getting feedback immediately. You know, I mentioned the shop I used to work in that literally had tests 3 times a day, so that you don't have much time going by before you know whether something you wrote just broke something else, or something you changed in your last commit broke something you've done this morning. And they find is that more tests are written as part of the SDLC. These people are still writing their own tests outside of the sprints, but they're writing fewer and fewer of them. But more of the tests are being written because more people are creating the tests. And they end up with a faster shippable product with higher quality and fewer surprises, really less drama, right? So that's what we're doing. And I want to move on now and pass the ball over to Leo, because Leo is going to share, really, Sauce Labs has a very similar vision, kind of a slightly different domain and different moving pieces, but Leo's going to share with you how they look at this problem and how they look at helping people shift left and to reduce the drama. So thanks, Leo. Jump in.
Thanks, Dave. Just making sure for folks on the phone that you can see my screen.
I can. I see your title slide.
Awesome. So yeah, Dave, thanks for the intro. My name is Leo Laskin. I'm a senior solutions architect at Sauce Labs. And like Dave, I have a background that comes before my role at Sauce and before Dave's role at Blazemeter. I came from the quality assurance space, where I started off with doing lots of testing, everything from manual to automated. And testing does fall in many different places throughout the software development lifecycle. With that, before we get any further, I do want to start with a quick poll question. Just let me know where most of your testing falls currently. Great. So taking a look at the answers, it looks like everyone's sort of a mix. I'm seeing a lot of people doing a lot of UI testing, which makes sense, but also some unit testing and integration tests throughout, a good split between UI testing and the other 2 types of testing. And then, of course, some of you are still not running your automated test, and that's something we'll approach shortly. So with that, what I want to talk about is how CI/CD looks at testing and what continuous testing looks like in the modern world today with CI/CD. You really want to be testing throughout your development cycle. We have here is a typical development cycle. First, you start planning your development, you write some code, you build, you release, you deploy, and then, of course, you run and monitor how your testing is going. But really, your testing falls throughout that time frame. You're going to be constantly running these tests, making sure that both your automated tests and hopefully very few manual tests are working throughout your process. And then it's a lather, rinse, repeat, because this is a never-ending cycle, right? You're constantly developing new features. You're constantly working on making sure that things are working. Now, different levels of that testing that I just pulled about, the unit testing, the integration testing, the functional UI testing, may happen during different parts of this cycle. And so what we're trying to do at Sauce is provide you a way, along with partners like Blazemeter, to, of course, give you a way to run all of those tests in one place or to make yourself really functional. So a quick note about Sauce, for those of you who haven't heard of us before, we've been around for about 8 years, actually we just turned 9, and we're really focused on how to solve the problem of development and deployment quicker for all sizes of organizations. The primary places we're looking to help you with is getting to CI/CD, and you really can't achieve that with manual testing. So to accelerate your pipeline, you're really going to have to automate testing. So what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be getting your test time, actually, we've seen some of our customers get their test time down by factors of 10. It's actually one of the reasons we call this presentation 10x. We've actually seen a few of our customers, by using distributed tools and cloud-based tools, drop their test time from using local tools because they're able to run so many tests in parallel. Also, by automating your tests, you're actually going to be able to increase quality. Not only are you able to test many more tests in parallel, but you're going to be able to test across multiple browsers, operating systems, and of course devices if you're looking at mobile things, whether they're simulated and emulated devices or real devices in the cloud. You're not only going to improve user experience by testing across multiple browsers, but you're going to be able to enter new markets with instant access to all sorts of browsers from all over the world. Increased quality in today's software business often leads to increased revenue for our customers. In fact, we have a customer in the retail space, again, I can't mention, just as Dave can't, who they exactly are, but they came to us and said that for every browser that they're able to test on, they recognize over $1 million in yearly revenue, just in the fact that they're able to test on more than one browser. And of course, we're trying to improve efficiency. So instead of having to build and maintain a homegrown testing grid where you're running all these browser and OS combinations yourself, there are limitations on many browsers, like having multiple versions of different browsers on one machine is very difficult, or being able to run multiple parallel tests on one machine can be difficult. So those who run an internal grid find that they get a lot of false failures due to either a lack of information from the browsers or faulty infrastructure, where they end up having these issues happen because they haven't updated their systems. So we're here to take care of all that hard work and updates for you. And we actually have one of the lowest false failure rates in the industry, with something like 0.02 false failure rates of test run on SOS. You're also going to save on the expense of the infrastructure and maintenance and upkeep. So you're going to be able to get fast results while spending less money. Now, the average SOS user tests across 41 browser and OS combinations. Obviously, setting that up is going to be really costly. What you're going to see here is, with increased coverage, you're going to broaden your addressable market and expand testing to even earlier releases. So you're going to be able to have access to things like early beta and development Firefox and Chrome releases, potentially even beta Edge releases, and then, of course, Android and iOS versions that may be in beta. And one of the things we're also going to provide you, which we'll see in a minute, is full videos of your entire test, as well as automatically taken screenshots and logs, which are going to help to speed bug identification and resolution. One of the things I like to always think of, and for those of you on the phone, you don't have to answer, just sort of laugh to yourself if you've heard this recently, is when you get a video of a test, when you're running on a Premiere, on an environment that you know is the same every time, and a developer comes to you and says, oh, it works on my machine. How many of you have heard that recently, right? And when you hear that, instead you can say, look, we don't really care. We'll point our test at SOS. What we do is we take our test, we write some scripts, we then have all this access to tons of browser OS combinations, getting our tests running faster because they're running in parallel, and then we bring you back these results that include a video. And look, a video is worth, a lot more than, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. A video is worth more than 1,000 pictures, because then you can't deny it. There's no way to say, hey, no, I don't do it this way. So with that, I do want to get into another poll. So what I want to ask about is how your current automation at your organization looks. How are you doing as far as automating your tests? Yeah, so it looks like we have what I'm typically seeing in the industry, right? Some shops are 100% automated. That's awesome to hear. I'm real excited to see even a fifth of the respondees with that. Most of you guys are 75 to 50%. So it looks like you're well on the journey towards CI/CD, towards true CI/CD, where really you need to be at as close to 100% automated testing as you can be. And then it looks like about a quarter of the folks on the call are just getting started in your automated journey. So one of the things we like to talk about with your automated journey is actually getting your tests parallel and atomic. So this is really important, right? If you're only running one test, if you take one test that runs a minute and you have 300 of those tests, Well, it's going to take you 5 hours to run them one at a time. Now, if you have 300 available sessions, you could, in theory, get those tests down to as quick as 1 minute. So that being said, what you may actually be able to do is then go and run cross-browser. Let's say you have 5 browser and OS combinations that you test on that are required to be accepted by your organization. So what you're going to be able to do then is say, well, look, it could have taken me 25 hours. Or because I had 300 available sessions, I've dropped my time down to 5 minutes. One of the things that Dave just talked about as well is context switching. And we have to especially think about how developers context switch. Now, the average human spends about 5 minutes of attention span on any single given topic. And that means that after listening to myself and Dave talk, I guarantee some of you have gone and checked your email, some of you have logged into Facebook, gone down the wiki tunnel, who knows. But that being said, developers, I tend to think, have an even shorter attention span. So I want you to think of what the process of switching from feature 1 to feature 2 for any developer in your organization is. If you think of that and tell them that, hey, I'm going to come to you with results from my testing 25 hours from now, over a day, think of how many features they may have gone on to, how many times they may have forgotten about what's happened. What did they work on in the previous feature? What was their previous goal? And now they're working on something new. When you bring them a bug about something old, they're not going to be excited about it. They don't love it. So instead, you want to get them as quick a result as possible and provide them with as much data as possible. Again, within that 5-minute window if possible, just enough time to go talk about what happened on the most recent episode of Game of Thrones or Westworld or whatever's on TV currently. Sadly, none of them are on yet. So with that, let's take a look at some atomic tests, what they should look like when written with best practices for Selenium, and then run some and see how long they take. So really quick here, I just have my IntelliJ Java IDE open here. And first I'm going to talk about how we parallelize tests. This is a Java framework, though we do have examples available for just about every language out there. And so for Java, the most important thing about parallelization is actually what's called the Maven Surefire plugin. This is a plugin that's distributed by Apache. It's open source. And what it provides you is it provides you the opportunity to parallelize by thread or fork, though thread is preferable. And what I've done here is I've actually set my test up to parallelize for up to 100 simultaneous tests at any given time. That's actually the number of available threads I have to myself on my Sauce Labs account. So I've set this as the max so that it runs as quickly as possible. Then inside of the main test base, which is where I create my driver, etc., I've actually created a data provider, because this is TestNG, where I've actually set all of the different browser and OS combinations I want to check on. So here I'm testing Edge, Firefox, IE, Safari, Chrome, current versions, older versions. I actually am able to just say the latest and then always have the latest version as my preferred version. I then go down here and actually create that driver by connecting to a remote web driver, which is in our on-demand grid. This is the Sauce Labs grid, and you're able to really quickly set this up. If you already have running automated tests and they're running either on a local machine like your personal desktop or laptop, or even better on a local grid that's hosted by your organization, it's a very quick change. Every language just about is 3 lines or less of code that would need to be changed to run on Sauce Labs, and to run in parallel should be anywhere from 10 to 30 lines depending on how your framework is structured. What we've also done here is we've also implemented a way to display the Sauce result inside of Jenkins. And that way we're going to later on be able to get very important data into our Jenkins test environment for being able to continuously integrate our code using a proper CI system such as Jenkins. Now, the tests themselves here are on purpose written sort of simplistically. We have a basic test here that just does login. Don't forget, with atomic and independent testing, we want to make sure that our tests don't rely on each other, but also that they run quickly and test only one very specific thing within a test. So with that, I try to assert only around 1 or 2 maximum things during a test that are different from each other. If you're asserting that a lot of stuff is visible on one screen, you may want to have that in one test. However, if you're asserting the function of how something that is on a screen is working, that should be an individual test, different from asserting that something is visible on the screen at the same time. So let's look at our cart test here. Dave described earlier our little demo page here for the Demo Blaze website, where we're selling some electronics, cell phones and laptops and such. And so we've created some tests around that as well. And so this is just an item that adds the phone that's visible on the screen, the HTC cell phone, directly to the cart. and then verifies the product is added successfully. There's actually a pop-up that appears when that test is run. There's a lot of other tests that are going to run here, but what we'll do is I've committed this into my GitHub repository, and I'm going to configure this to run inside of Jenkins. So we're going to really quickly click the Build Now button in Jenkins, and then refresh as this page configures. What it's going to do is it's going to grab my repo, build that, and then within about a minute, it's actually going to run all of these tests. Why don't we go and watch the Sauce Labs dashboard while that's running? So really quickly, what we're going to see here is we're going to see a large number of tests pop into the screen. We're also going to see the speedometer pop up with lots of tests running on it. And then we're going to be able to go and watch those tests and see how they ran. So here you can see we're running 36 different tests in parallel across multiple OSs and browser combinations. So here we have a Windows 7 test, a Safari 10 test, Windows 10 on IE Edge, and so on. And more of these tests are coming in as they load in to the thread processor on my laptop, and then they're spinning up on Sauce in parallel. These tests are all running, and as you can see, many of these tests have already completed. So here we actually notice that we have some tests that are failing, which are surprising, and especially the verify login success test, and I wonder why it failed. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to be able to go in and watch these tests to see what the issue was. So if we click on this, we're actually going to get the actual test details for the test. The first thing we're going to actually do is go watch the video of this test. This is going to show us the browser instance popping up, the operating system, which was iOS, open up, and here we're going to see us navigate to the page. We try to do something, it obviously isn't going to work, and the test ends. This test ran in a total of 8 seconds, as you can see here at the bottom right of the screen, and because it's running in parallel, we got that information back to our developers quickly. Now, if we look at the commands, we can very quickly identify. We're trying to click the login button, and if we look on my screen here, login is at the top right of the screen. It's very easily visible. However, because we've done cross-browser testing, we've identified that at lower resolutions of testing, we can't see the login button. As a user, I would not be able to click that login, and so I wouldn't be able to add the HTC One M9 to my cart. So this would be very difficult for me to be able to pass information along to my users. So with that, again, we can get more information. We can actually grab logs for our tests. So here we have the full Selenium logs of what was happening, the exact items we were searching for, the exact elements we were clicking on, any text we were passing, etc. Obviously, here we were unable to find that login element. We retried it a few times because we have a explicit wait around that element, but we didn't provide that element, so of course we failed. Now, of course, we are able to see those pass and fail values, so we see that lots of my tests did pass. In fact, even if we look at this test that failed, and we can verify that even at low resolutions, my categories test, which tests the categories values here, will pass because those are not covered by the banner on the top of the page. Now, the difference between testing using BlazeMeter and using Sauce Labs is we're testing different parts of the stack. You're going to find that your unit integration tests tend to fall more on performance testing and API-related testing items. So you're going to see more things that are related to your API tests, that are related to the calls that your website or application is making. However, with functional UI testing, you're going to be able to catch issues like this, cross-browser issues, where customers are going to have issues seeing important information around using your application. Now, because we ran this in Jenkins, we do have a console log. We actually ran a total of 48 tests. Quite a few of them failed. In fact, many of them failed because we were unable to log into the account due to bad resolution. So we actually have identified that the demo Blaze page itself is not cross-browser compatible. It's not, especially not responsive and unable to support mobile testing. So if you have this as a mobile site, you very quickly know that this was going to be a problem, and you'd have to refactor for resizable and responsive dialogues. That being said, inside of Jenkins itself, we're also going to be able to see all the information around our most recent tests. We see all of our tests here that are running, that we ran, all 48 of them. We see their pass-fail status. And we're actually able to download the videos and logs directly from inside of Jenkins, as well as many other CI tools that have plugins available for them. We're able to see and download these logs. Now, for those of you that like to use one tool for everything, we've sort of thought of that and tried to create as easy a way for you to do that as possible. So we're actually going to give you the opportunity to view those videos and view those logs and the commands list directly from inside your Jenkins environment. So by adding in the job identifier and the pass-fail status of the job, we're able to then display this information inside of Jenkins. And here again, we're able to see that the login window for this test, which actually happens to be the same test we just clicked on earlier, which was Chrome 62 for the verify login, wasn't successful because we didn't find that login button. It just didn't exist, right? It would have normally been behind this image of the phone. So the only thing that you need to know along with this is also that you're going to be able to analyze information. One of the things that you want to do after your tests are done is provide analytics to your managers, to those you report to, so that they can see what's happening with your tests. So we're going to very quickly be able to identify the analytics around our tests. We can see that in the last 7 days, you've run thousands of tests. And hopefully your number is going to be higher than mine. I only run a small number of tests, primarily to show how applications work. But as your numbers grow higher, you're going to see more information around your pass-fail rate. Look at this. I have a pass-fail rate that on the 4th of December around noon was more like half and half. That's not great. So I may want to dig into those values and identify exactly what's happening. Well, we're going to see that I ran a couple of tests, and of those tests, most of them failed. So when we look into one of those builds, we can see that here we had 4 failing tests and 4 passed ones, and we can identify information around those tests by verifying why they failed, what items were missing from those tests. Now, with that, I do want to leave you with one quick thing, which is as you move closer to CI/CD, you're going to be able to rapidly and quickly get that information to your teams, which is going to be able to allow you to deploy faster. Don't forget, the paradigm we want to get to as we test is more like this image here, where we're constantly testing. And if you have 2-week turnaround cycles or even 1-day turnaround cycles, you're going to end up with less of the test time that happens in this graph. Instead, you're going to end up with something like you have a test only after build or a test only after release, which is after you've gone to production, and you're more likely to find issues that end up affecting your customers. So with that, I leave you with the fact that you want to make sure that you're constantly testing. And so let's do this.
Well, thanks, Leo. Thanks, Dave. This is Bill from Sauce Labs. We want to open it up to Q&A in the minutes we have remaining before the top of the hour. I have a question here from Lisa, who is asking, so give me one moment while I think to pop out. Please discuss the pros and cons of using the Chrome plugin for creating the tests versus using the BlazeMeter function that reads the Swagger docs to create the tests. I guess that would be a question for Dave.
Sure, thanks. So obviously, Lisa knows a thing or two about what we have available. So if you had a Swagger doc of the API, you're ahead of a lot of people, and that's great. We do indeed have a feature, we call it API Test Maker, that can consume a Swagger doc and automatically generate not just one, but multiple tests with the positive and negative and edge cases for you, so that depending on how much detail you have on the constraints in your Swagger doc, we'll actually generate multiple tests, and then we'll run them for you. We'll generate them on the fly for you, and you'll be able to see them and enhance or edit them, and B, we can execute them as a suite in just a few seconds. So yes, if you have access to Swagger doc versions of your APIs, then API Test Maker is a great way to go. What I was showing today is really just that no matter where you are in the life cycle, I wanted to get a good example of a Taurus YAML file, and since the JMeter plugin can spit out that format, it basically gives you a working version from the start. That's all I was doing. But yeah, both approaches are valid. But certainly, if you have the Swagger doc, you're in a great space to jump in.
Okay. Here's one that I'll throw to both of you. Christine is asking, is 100% automation a realistic goal? Considering the effort automation feasibility analysis, some test cases may not be good candidates for automation.
Yeah,
Dave,
go ahead, Leo.
We're both wet. I'll start, and of course I'll pass it back over to Dave. I actually think that you're correct, that 100% test automation is not an ideal goal. And in fact, before you start automating anything, you should go and prioritize all of your test cases to verify the test cases that you're automating are actually worth running over and over again. That being said, what you want to do is you want to have as close to 100% passing automation, especially functional UI automation, as possible. However, 100% passing functional UI automation is very difficult, and I rarely find shops that exceed more than 95 or 98%. So if you can get there, I think that you're doing really well. Dave?
Yeah, I would say the idea that you would automate all tests and have everything 100% automated is probably going a little too far, because the kind of diminishing returns. What we're really advocating is that from a coverage perspective, you should have some fundamental, even if it's extremely rudimentary, test on everything you've got, and you should have that as part of just building the code in the first place. Would that catch all conditions? No, it wouldn't. But if you've got, if you have sort of atomic pieces of code, for goodness sakes, have atomic tests that verify they're working. But in terms of 100% automation, I mean, I went to a trade show once, and one of the vendors was saying, 100% automation is possible or is reality or whatever, and it's a lofty goal. I don't think that I don't think you actually want to have all your tests automated all the time. There's also still a role for just kind of the exploratory testing. The idea is that you shouldn't be finding things late in the game because fundamental questions weren't asked early on.
That sounds good. Hey, Leo, we do have one question that was pre-submitted by Sean, and he asks, what are your thoughts on Selenium no longer being supported by Firefox? Will you be supporting any other test case frameworks, such as Catalan?
Yeah, great question, Sean. So Selenium itself is still completely supported by Firefox. I think what you're referring to is a recent change by Firefox, to stop supporting plugins made with a certain type of API. So that being said, I think Selenium IDE is no longer supported by Firefox, so you can no longer use record and play tools for testing with Firefox, which are plugins for Firefox. However, the Selenium community has identified this as a missing piece of the puzzle for some people, and so there is active work being done by multiple open source developers to create Selenium IDE 2, which will be supported by current versions of Firefox and other browsers as well. So it'll actually be cross-browser compatible, so you won't only be able to record those tests in Firefox. That being said, I do want to caution you against using record and play tools like the IDE, because they are hard to maintain and they will make your testing be very fragile and difficult to keep up. With the constant changing UIs in our CI/CD world, where things are constantly being updated, new releases are constantly being made, and features are being developed, your testing needs to be rapidly updatable using something like a page object model or a commonly used framework. If you're using record and play tools, those don't use commonly accepted models, and so you're going to find that those tests are very difficult to maintain and develop.
Cool, thank you. Here is a question from Maggie that I'll throw to both of you. Yeah. Dave, can you hear me?
Oh, let's just say I've got one. Yeah, can you hear me okay? I got one I want to take off. Someone asked a question about JMeter I can get to when we get a chance.
Sure, sure. Why don't you jump on that one?
Can someone throw me the presenter role so I can share screen? Yeah, I'd love to share screen real quick. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the question was, how do I create new users with JMeter? I want to check online exam page performance. How can we create multiple users, and how can I check performance and load testing? So the idea of creating users as part of your testing makes great sense. You want to have fresh and valid users and then be able to run tests with them. If you actually go to, if you just Google JMeter Academy, the first thing that's going to come up is a link to this page on blazemeter.com, which will let you sign up for a free training course we created. And one of the modules in that course is lesson 3 in the advanced course called Set Up and Tear Down Thread Groups. And in here we give you exactly the example you're looking for, which is that there's a feature in JMeter that lets you run something once at the beginning of a test, in this case to create users, and you could even run something once at the end of the test, which would be maybe to delete those users when you're finished. So hop on over to JMeter Academy, grab a free account and check the advanced course for lesson number 3 to get a more detailed answer than I could give you on the webinar.
All right, that sounds good. So I was going to throw to both of you. It was mentioned earlier that when deciding to shift left in testing, the QA role was folded into the developer role. What were some of the challenges that came with that? And again, that is from Maggie T.
Well, there probably as many as there are environments where the transition happens. I'm aware of environments where they disbanded they sort of took the team that was centralized and sent them out into the individual teams, and so that was sort of a disperse and embed kind of approach. I've also seen environments where it was just part of the creating the new teams that they had the teams think about doing all their testing for themselves from the very beginning, and the teams had the option of bringing in a agile testing sort of coach, someone who actually was a skilled tester and could teach them how to do testing. And there's another example. If you actually just Google quality at speed JIRA, they actually had a 5-year journey they went on where they, instead of having 70 QA people for 70 developers, they had 5. And what these people was quality assistance people, and their job was indeed to teach the development teams how to do their own testing, because developers aren't necessarily great testers from the get-go, and to act as a sort of a safety layer. So there's many different ways this is handled. I actually asked one of my customers, I said, do the developers, not like being asked to do the testing? And their answer surprised me, which was, these people are very highly compensated and hired to be very good at what they do, and they want to be able to prove that the code they create is what was needed. So they actually want to have the testing skills so that they can, they don't want to get surprised that somebody else found a bug downstream. So like I said, there's kind of as many, unfortunately, there's about as many answers as there are environments where people make this transition. But I think that the short answer is that it needs to happen in time and place where development is done. Whether it's done by developers or by embedded testers really kind of comes down to the culture and the management and the scene.
And from my side, an example I've seen be successful is making sure to co-locate groups of people together, whether they be located in the same group per se, physically located, or if they're together and they all work together. A great thing, if you can get them located in the same environment, is to have people sitting in pods, where it's actually like almost, let's call it a tiger team that's doing the work on a certain feature. And that way QA and development sit side by side, as do UX and product designers. And so there, questions get asked early in the process. You're able to really early define quality metrics and tests that are required. And so you're almost able, or hopefully able, to develop your automation in sprint. And so that way your tests are there to be committed as soon as the developer is ready to commit their code.
Very good. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I'll end with this one. I think it's very relevant to the presentation that we've just had. But we're being asked for the performance testing, though we have started to shift left and use API testing for the component, can we skip the performance test on the final version of the integrated code?
That's a loaded question. I would say you can't skip it, but you should find it very boring, ideally. So what should happen is that you really shouldn't be finding new stuff, but there could be infrastructure-related issues. Ideally, you literally want to test through the production firewall and SSL accelerator and load balancers and all that stuff to really know, is there something that goes wrong that'll affect my customers before I actually push code to customers. So it's never too late to do some testing, but what happens is the drama tends to go away. So I have a customer that literally had half their teams do shift left and half not, and when they would get to the integration testing and the pre-deployment testing, the half that had done the shift left basically had nothing to learn and nothing to do, and the half that had not were doing the typical pull let your hair fire drill. So I think that there still can be and should be holistic end-to-end testing done late in the game, but it's not the thing that's going to find most of your problems. It's the thing that's going to find the very rare problem.
Very good. Well, we are right at the top of the hour. Leo, Dave, I want to thank you very much, and everyone in attendance for taking time to sit in on our presentation. As was mentioned at the outset, we will be sending out an email to everyone, even those who were not able to attend, that will include a link to the recording of the presentation and to the slides themselves. And with that, we will go ahead and conclude the broadcast. Thank you again, and happy continuous testing. Talk to you all later.